first, are there any bill introductions this morning? And actually, I'm going to be introducing the governor's supplemental bill, which the RS number is 22 RS 2501. Seconded by Representative Wolfmore. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes. The second is the governor's mega bill for the all agencies for fiscal year 2023 through 2025, and the RS number is 22 RS 2337. Is there a second? Second by Representative Carlin. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Any other bill introductions this morning? Representative Helgerson.
The RS number is RS 2933, and the bill corrects some of my mistakes in my younger time where I eliminated transfers to the local areas. That has been in effect for 20-some years.
Is there a second? Second by Representative Carlin. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Bill introductions. Representative Dotson.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair and committee. Appreciate the invitation to appear here. I request the committee introduce 22 RS 2666. This is a request for Kansas State University to dispose of 3 different tracts of property. These are deemed no longer necessary, and this has been approved in December for transfer by the Board of Regents. One of those is in Cherokee County, Kansas. This was a error from a previous transfer. There's a house on that property that did not get transferred properly. Another one is for in Douglas County, Nebraska. This is for a clinic that we use to rotate students in and out of that's no longer needed. And the last one is in Riley County, just north of the Bill Snyder Family Stadium, about 15 acres, which will be transferred.
All right, committee, there's the bill introduction. Motion by Representative Carlin. Is there a second? Second by Representative Helgerson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Bill is introduced.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Schreiber.
Yeah,
Do we need to taller mic?
Sorry. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'd like to introduce a bill for the sale of property from Emporia State University. The RS number is 2815. It's a facility that's a couple of blocks from the university and it's no longer needed, and it's in kind of a development area, so the university would like to get it sold.
All right, thank you, Representative. Motion is made by Representative Helgerson, seconded by Representative Prahl. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Bill is introduced.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Any further bill introductions this morning? All right, seeing none, we're going to go ahead and move on to our agenda. You should have been receiving some follow-up information regarding the land of Kansas from the Department of Agriculture and the Spark Investment Idea Submission Form from the Office of Recovery. They have been sent to you in electronic format. Next, we need to approve the minutes for the meeting that we had on January 2nd when we had the governor's budget released, when we had the joint meeting with the House Appropriations and the Senate Ways and Means. Were there any changes to those minutes? All right, seeing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes? Motion by Representative Helgerson, second by Representative Rajas. All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye. Aye. Opposed? Minutes are approved. All right, now we're going to go ahead and move into our main items in the agenda today, and that is going to be an update from the Children's Cabinet and the Children's Initiative Fund. And so I would invite the Executive Director, Melissa Ruker, to committee. Welcome to committee.
I need a much smaller microphone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Going to stay masked up today. I'm not yet released from care after having some significant surgery right before Christmas. So with your indulgence, we'll juggle glasses and masks and get through this. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about the Children's Initiative Fund. As I look around the committee table, I see people with experience who understand the history of the cabinet. So in the interest of time, I've included that in testimony, but I won't dwell on the details of our makeup. The cabinet is charged with oversight over the Children's Initiative Fund investments. The Children's Initiative Fund is funded by the Master Tobacco Settlement funds the state receives annually. They are put into the Kansas Endowment for Youth, and then the state budget has a transfer that puts the funding into the Children's Initiative Fund. Most of the line items in the CIF, as we call it, are pass-through transfers to other state agencies. There is a fund called the Early Childhood Block Grant that is administered by the Cabinet's governing board. The Early Childhood Block Grant is, there's an annual RFP, so it's an open application process. Recipients of our grant funding agree as a condition of that funding to participate in our Common Measures Initiative, which is an annual evaluation process that conforms with our statutory responsibility to use evidence and data to drive decision making. The budget this year, in the governor's budget, is one that reflects the cabinet's recommendations from our June 4th, 2021 meeting for FY23. The cabinet has really done a deep dive evaluating the history and the purpose of the line item transfers in the CIF. And this year, we were ready to do this last year, but with the onset of the pandemic, it was just really poor timing to start calling for some restructuring. But in June of this year, the cabinet took some steps to make some recommendations that I'd like to review with you right now. So the first is to refer back to the statute that said in statute the transfer from the key fund to the CIF, it should be 102.5% of the prior year transfer. And so the cabinet made that their first recommendation, that we follow statute. It's been a while. I'm not sure if it's routinely ever been that 2.5% increase, but we would ask for that. And I would say in reflection, it appears the governor's budget has about a 1% increase. So that's a good starting point. The next series of recommendations from the cabinet involve changes to line items in the CIF, things that were being transferred out for purposes that really were more related to resolving gaps in the budget through the 20-teens, through some years of hardship, than actual programs that align with the cabinet's mission. So the biggest one is the Children's Mental Health Waiver. Those are Medicaid waiver services. There was $3.7 million being transferred from 2014, I think was the first year of that transfer. And in working with the agency secretary, their budget reflects the funding needed for that fund. Those are critical services for children ages 5 to 18, but they can be funded and should be part of the package of funding for the Medicaid program services in Kansas. The next is a $500,000 line item for child care quality improvement. This is part of our overall goal to better align services and stop fragmenting the system. DCF has a quality improvement system in place. It's part of federal requirements, and they have federal funding to pay for it. So we are requesting that $500,000 remain in the CIF so that we can invest it in purposes directly related to some of our other programs. There are two smaller line items, just over $50,000 for the infant toddler hearing aid bank. KDHE has agreed that their existing resources can absorb the cost of that program. So that in all of these cases, the programs, the intent is that they continue, but they just not be funded with these CIF transfers. And the final is the autism the autism diagnosis. That is funding $50,000 going to KU Med Center to train screeners to conduct the screenings. The funding was used when that initiative first passed to help get it set up, but it is believed that it can be absorbed through existing resources into their overall budget, because that's such a fraction of the funding overall. There's a line item that has been funded in the prior 4 state budgets. It was a pilot program put in the budget. It was 3-year pilot for CADE, the acronym CAEDE, Communities Aligned. I don't remember the acronym, but anyway, it was a pilot program, and the 3 years was put into the budget. The cabinet at the time did an RFP, and the 3-year award was given to the Family Conservancy in Wyandotte County. And then last year there was a 4th year added, so that $1 million continued. We did an RFP last year. We had exactly 1 applicant for it, and it was the Family Conservancy. So our ask is that $1 million get moved into the early childhood block grants so that the RFP process can be more streamlined and aligned, and less of a burden on staff to operate 2 separate calls for application and the review that is involved in that. So again, it's a program that we think has been very effective. We will continue to have an open call for applications, but we want to do 1 application process, not multiple. The rest of the changes involve what the redirection of funds within the CIF. So we will, what we recommended is in the governor's budget. We want to increase the funding for the Universal Home Visiting Program. We would like to increase a little bit of more capacity into the early childhood block grant. We've added the Dolly Parton Imagination Library, and we've added an infrastructure line item which pertains to sustaining some projects that are developed and underway with funds that we have received in the last couple of years through some federal grant programs. So we received the Preschool Development Grant. We are developing a range of resources that are a collaboration between 4 state agencies. To sustain them will require some funds from all 4 sources. This would be the cabinet's share. I think I'll stop there and entertain questions at this time, if you have any. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Director Rucker, for being here. And obviously, you're trying to realign some of the money that goes into the Children's Initiatives Fund when we were having budgetary issues in prior years, and they were funding some very needed items. But now we're trying to streamline that and actually fit to the purpose of the Children's Initiative Fund. So I think you outlined this. So in the 4 items that you want to have funded by elsewhere, did you say that all of those can be absorbed by existing funds with the department, or is there going to be additional funding for particular departments to fund that?
I think that children's mental health waiver services through Medicaid will be the line item that needs funded through resources. And I don't know enough about how Medicaid funding is put together to know, but I know state share to draw down federal resources is needed. So we did work very closely with Secretary Howard, and she assured me once their budget went in that they had accounted for this in their budget for the Medicaid program.
Okay, and so obviously Chairman Carpenter is out of the room right now, but that'll be something that'll be going through his committee, and we'll probably be addressing that later. And so then the reallocation of those dollars, you said to the early childhood block grants, the home visiting, and early child infrastructure are going to be new items, or are those going to be?
2 new items and 2 existing that get additional funding. So early childhood block grant and the universal home visiting are existing line items. We would like additional resources to be able to serve more of the need. The universal home visiting right now is only serving 8% of the children born in Kansas. So it's a home visiting for newborns and for the new parents. And we're putting $250,000 in. It's been that static level for years and years. And over the years, we have served an ever decreasing percent share of the population. So we're looking to grow that program.
And what percentage of the state is covered by that currently?
8%.
8%.
8%. And it is one of the most effective things we can do to help new parents and the newborn children have a healthy start. So we would love to help grow. This is a $1.4 million increase, so it won't get us to, fully universal, but it will certainly help expand the reach. And it's KDHE's program, and that amount reflects an amount of growth that they are confident they can absorb into the upcoming year. It will take some time to staff and grow the program.
Well, I mean, as you're aware, you and I both traveled to North Carolina when we toured
Yes.
the state in regards to their child early development system that they have in North Carolina. And one of the things that we talked about on that visit was the home visits
Yes.
in regards to maternal care. So if we're currently covering 8% throughout the state, and we're increasing that to 1.4 million, what is the anticipated percentage rate that
I
will
knew
be
you'd
covered?
ask that. I apologize. I will respond to the committee with the anticipated range of the program, but you can see that will be a significant increase, given that the program, I think total has $750,000 that so KDHE has some of the funding as well, but we want to put 1.4 million more into it. I think when we did an estimate pre-pandemic, we were looking at in 2019 after that trip, it's 8 or 9 million to provide full coverage. So this is probably a 20% increase.
Okay. And what was the amount in fiscal year 2022 for the knowledge of the committee that was transferred from the master tobacco settlement to the Children's Initiative Fund?
Well, let's. So in 2022, it was $51,712,812.
Okay, so that's listed on Schedule 2.3 on your testimony?
Yeah.
And so fiscal year 2023, we're looking at about approximately $52.5 million.
Yep.
Correct? All right.
Yep.
Can you give one thing that we did last session, and both the House and the Senate advocated for the expansion of the Dolly Parton Imagination Library throughout the state of Kansas? Can you give an update on how that is progressing?
We're excited to have been named the state lead, so it's been a but what we were directed to do is use several resources. So we leveraged preschool development grant fund, allocated $350,000 into the state level expansion of the program. We learned a lot over the summer about limitations. So the federal grant is about existing resources. The library is such that designed for the state part to match 50% of the class for of builders. We expanded the program in-house that did not already have a full program. Add a line item, what we hope to do is be water and match 50% of funds. So for each child program, it's annual about $5. Books. The college the printing costs and the actually but it's not going to cover the postage. So points level 50% of that cost, so $12.50 the state program for below. So to got great programs across the state. The foundation is a strong partner in their 26. Start kindergarten, and it has paid off in terms of third grade reading scores. They've done some tracking in Tennessee, which is the state that's had it the longest. So it's a really nice program. We'd like to be able to advertise it and really push the partnership to be able to do it with the fidelity that the program requires.
Well, and I think, I advocated for this program last year because from the time that my son was born, and he's 3 right now, we enrolled him in the Dolly Parton Imagination Library when he was born. And we happened to fall in that 26 county jurisdiction with the Dane Hansen Foundation. So we were lucky enough to have that available to us. And even starting at the age of 1, he was grabbing the books off of his bookshelf and wanting to be read to every night. And his vocabulary right now is picked up quite a bit.
I bet. It's one
and
of the
I don't know if that's
things.
preschool or the books, but it's interesting sometimes when we're at home. But it's a valuable program, and we're lucky that we live.
Yeah.
In a place where the foundation had picked that up, and I think that needs to be available to all the kids that are born in Kansas.
Dane Hansen has the capacity to fund as many kids as sign up, but a lot of our other local affiliates have reached their maximum amount with the dollars they have, so we can double the amount of kids if we partner with them, with the state, with our CIF funds. So we would appreciate that. It is the purest thing that a parent can do with their child, is to sit down and read a book. So it's a pretty cool program.
All right, thank you. Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you, Melissa.
You too.
I did have a question regarding, let me play trombone for a minute, that regarding the Child Care Quality Initiative that you wanted to move from CIF to DCF. Well, switch that from DCF to CIF. You said that the DCF has federal funding for that.
do.
Now, is that one-time funding or is that ongoing?
The Child Care Subsidy Program is funded with federal funds called Child Care Development Block Grant Funds. So those funds come annually. There has been pandemic increases for emergency relief, and they have programs that are dealing with that. But this is part of the baseline annual funding. Our Child Care Quality Initiative predates a federal requirement to provide avenues to improve the quality of childcare. And so this would fall into that quality improvement. The program is called Links to Quality. They have done their pilot work to figure that program out. We've used some of our preschool development grant funding through the partnership we have with DCF to help map out the expansion of the Links to Quality program. And so we have full confidence that the quality improvement activities will take place. But this is a really nice time to stop transferring our funds into that program because they can use their federal dollars.
Sure, no arguments with that. I just wanted to make sure that
Yes.
those federal dollars were going to continue.
Yes.
Okay, very
Yep.
good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, and joining us by WebEx, Representative Landwehr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see you again, Melissa. Did
Hello.
I understand that we are now putting other funds into the children's cabinet besides tobacco funds?
No, Representative, the Children's Initiative Fund is just the tobacco funding, but we do have 2 federal grants outside the CIF. One is a long-time grant. We've served as the state lead for the community-based child abuse prevention program. We get about $1 million a year to do primary prevention activities. There is also a grant. It was an effort that happened before my appointment to this position. So it began in 2018 as a collaboration between the Children's Cabinet, DCF, KDHE, and the Department of Education. It was through the National Governors Association. Governor Collier supported an application for Kansas to be part of a mentoring project. So those 4 entities came together and spent a year doing cross-sector collaboration and efforts to break down silos and work better together. Out of that came a joint application for a federal grant program called the Preschool Development Grant Birth to 5. Kansas had landed a 1-year planning grant that was just getting underway when I arrived in my position in February of 19. So we spent a year doing the work to plan. We did a comprehensive state-level needs assessment. So it's actually nice because it's from 2019. It predates the pandemic. All of these resources are available on our website, so and I can provide hard copies if anyone would like them. Out of that needs assessment, we created a 5-year strategic plan for early childhood that has anchored the work that we've been engaged in throughout the pandemic to help frame the approach to relief funding. But we applied for and received a 3-year renewal of that preschool development grant to help us implement some of the strategies that are embedded in our strategic plan.
Okay, and I appreciate that answer. I just wanted to make sure that we don't look at, coming in and supplanting with SGF. So I just kind of misheard that. I think the work with grants is absolutely phenomenal. I know Representative Helgerson knows the Children's Cabinet very well, because I believe it's his legislation. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Representative Carlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a couple of quick questions, I think. What is the enrollment process for the Dolly Parton books? I mean, I'm surprised that there's that everybody's not enrolled. So
I know, right? Well, Dolly would love everybody to be enrolled.
Well, I know we have counties that don't participate.
Yeah, so you need a local partner. The enrollment actually is between the parent and the library project. So we never see the lists of data.
Someone mails them something.
Or, I mean, the program has developed, it could be a QR code, it can be an online application, it can be a paper form, but, so they offer a variety of avenues to register, but notifying people of the opportunity. We want to work with the Hospital Association through their 4th trimester program to help distribute to new moms as they're leaving the hospital. There's all kinds of things that we can do once we can be truly a statewide partner.
So we just aren't there yet
Right.
to that level. But WIC and some of those programs would also be an opportunity for you to, okay, thank you. And the other thing I'm very concerned about, autism diagnosis. I worked with Dr. Heitzman Powell a long time ago.
Yep.
And she would have sold her, her clothing to get funding for that, and probably did. She really struggled to get funding for that. So I'm concerned that we're moving that. I'm glad that they feel healthy. Would they ever be able to go back and ask for money from us once we move that off?
I mean, nothing precludes them from indicating need. We look at the assessment of the service in our annual evaluation, looking for it. Our annual report is available online, so I did contact KU before the June cabinet meeting and received no pushback for the recommendation, so.
Well, it's a.
There were,
It was a time when she started that diagnosis up, I guess it was maybe 10, 12 years ago, that maybe she was just starting, but
I mean, that's my understanding, is that when they were just starting, they needed to train people on how to do the screening. What we found is that last year there were 33 children served by these funds. There were professional development opportunities were the primary function of the funding to help continue training. So we received no pushback since the cabinet made this recommendation.
One more thing then, is the 33 that were served, were there others that were diagnosed as not being in need of service?
It says 30.
That's still a process that.
33 families across 18 counties completed an autism evaluation via telehealth after being screened in their community. So that's the total number screened.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two questions, if I may. So can you, I just want a little more information about KSA 382102, which is talking about the transfer from the Key Fund to the CIF. Maybe you can give me a little history. What I don't understand about that is we know the tobacco receipts are going down.
Well,
I mean, I'm looking at your list on this page, this one.
Yep.
That has a chart. And I remember we're expecting them to go down just because of
so consensus revenue estimates are where that number comes from. They routinely anticipate a very conservative number. I do worry, and this is that point where I will say it's disturbing that our funding is predicated on cigarette and tobacco sales, right? So it's very uncomfortable that is our sole source of funding, but here we are. There is always a built-in expectation that with all of the new products that fall outside that settlement agreement, the e-cigarettes and vaping products are not subject to the settlement. So if there is more reliance on those products and less on tobacco sales, our funding will go down. It has varied over the years. Legislative research is actually the source of this large.
And that's great. I didn't get to ask my question yet. I just was pointing out that the tobacco numbers, it seems like they're going down from the
If you look at the actuals lately, they've been holding pretty.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, even if they hold steady, my question is about the 102.5% that the amount to the CIF is going up and up and up, and at some point it's going to exhaust that fund. I mean, how? Maybe someone with more history. You are welcome to answer my question, but maybe the chairman could answer that question too. That the history, at some point, if we keep going up, it will exhaust the fund. So, what is the plan for that?
So the actual history is that we've not been going up in terms of transfers from Key Fund to CIF. The history is that the legislature for 20 years has swept funds from the Key Fund into the State General Fund for a variety of reasons.
I'm aware of that. My question, though, is you're asking that we do go ahead and transfer it according to the statute,
if I
which
may,
I understand.
If I may answer.
What's my question?
Your question is what happens in the future if we honor the statute and add 2.5% a year.
Great.
I get it. The Key Fund should be an endowment that is several $100 million strong that generates interest through investments through CAPERS board. They manage the key fund. The idea behind it was that that interest would be added each year and help fund the programs. We don't have that level of endowment because of 20 years of fund sweeps. So what we're trying to do right now for this year is increase funding by 2.5%, or even the 1% that's currently in the budget would be welcome. So I can't speak to future years whether we would continue to make that recommendation. The Children's Cabinet Governing Board annually makes budget recommendations. But for this year, that is the recommendation, that we, given the need that the pandemic has created and exposed, because it's need that predates the pandemic that has been exacerbated, we are asking for some increased capacity this year.
And I'm noticing that the total available fund at the end of, estimated at the end of FY 2023 is $10 million lower than.
That is because the estimate is so much lower than the actual.
And we'll have to see. And when does that come out? When do we know?
We will find out the prior year. So last year, I believe it was $59 million or $56 million.
Yep.
So it was significantly more than estimated.
And so if you're wanting to build up, even like an endowment, it seems like then holding off on some of the expenses is one of the ways to do it. And I'm just looking at this trying to understand, but I have one other question, and it has to do with the early childhood infrastructure.
Yep.
And is that chart that's on the page where your signature is, does that chart go with that paragraph right above it? And so can you tell me what the ages, stages questionnaire is?
The Ages and Stages questionnaire is a developmental screening tool. It has been adopted as a statewide screener for children entering kindergarten, but it's also used in other arenas, and it used to be individual, what they call enterprise accounts. So individual pods of providers would have their own accounts. We've adopted a state level enterprise account. It's more cost effective and it's more efficient. So parents only, if their pediatrician wants them to complete this screening, if the school is asking them to complete the screening, if they have a child with some other type of service and that service provider wants them to complete the screening, they actually only need to do it one time now because we have one system instead of the fragmented system with dozens and dozens and dozens of different
Could we get a copy of that questionnaire?
Sure.
Okay, maybe we could arrange to get a copy just so we can see what it is. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, and if you look at, I think Kansas Legislative Research has also supplied some information in regards to the transfers. And in fiscal year 2022, the estimated transfer from the settlement revenues was $47 million. And if you look at what was supplied, we're looking at $52 million. Oh, no, actually, $52.3 million in fiscal year 2022.
Yep.
So we're above the estimate that was made by Kansas Legislative Research. And I would say during the pandemic, we received $59 million in fiscal year 2021, which was far more than the estimated amount. For whatever reason, we received more money because of the pandemic, but that was the transfer to the Children's Initiative Fund in fiscal year 2021.
Yeah, I would say we have conservative enough estimates that we routinely beat the estimates, and that our preference is to serve more children right now. The goal of creating an endowment large enough to actually support the program activities is probably long gone. In my opinion, the amount of funding that has been diverted over time, and it is overall, you can see the history. either research can provide the 20-year history, or I can. Let me know if you'd like me to provide it. But we have lost enough of the potential funding that would have created the endowment that we really don't have an endowment.
Well, in discussions that you and I have had, you have expressed that since the onset of the Children's Initiative Fund, you've been doing performance-based budgeting.
We have, yes.
And what you invest as far as what money comes from the Children's Initiative funds, you want to see those results. And that is the whole entire purpose of what we're trying to do with performance-based budgeting.
Yes, exactly right. So this year, our cabinet made these recommendations based on the results. Last year, we did an analysis of the prior 5 years, and then for the June recommendations meeting, we relied on a look at historical data and information about the programs we've been funding and the annual performance evaluation of our programs. So these are the recommendations that came out of that deep dive into the work that the programs we fund are doing.
All right. Thank you. I'm not seeing any. Oh, Representative Wolfmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. And if this isn't a question for you, just let me know who I should talk to. I know during the course of the pandemic, because of kids out of school or a lot of illness with child care providers, we experienced a crisis. And with Spark Funds, the Y and the Girls and Boys Club stepped up and helped meet that need. Sort of, what is the state of child care and the ability for parents to find enough adequate child care providers? And that's probably a long answer, but the short answer is Needs Exposed brought it up.
Yeah, we are in crisis. We had trouble before the pandemic. The pandemic has made it worse. We did our comprehensive needs assessment in 2019. At that time, 44% of Kansas children lived in child care deserts, which are it's a census tract where there are 3 times as many children that are eligible for child care as child care slots available. So we have a child care workforce that was, half the workforce was over 50. And that's a statistic from prior to pandemic. So aging out of the profession and trouble recruiting in. So I thank the legislature for the work on the Promise Scholarship and the inclusion of child development in that program, because we are hoping to be able to attract more people to the profession. Providers are under duress. We did a 2020 update to the needs assessment looking at the effect of the pandemic, and we actually have a 2021 update underway, so we'll have fresh data on the impact. But providers are leaving the profession. They were never shut down because of the critical need for our frontline workers to have childcare, but infections have shut down programs. Last Friday night, while cooking dinner we had an emergency crop up because a program here in Topeka had an outbreak among staff, and they didn't have enough staff to keep doors open, and there were things that needed to be done over the weekend to try and keep this provider from calling it a day and shutting her program down completely, because the stress of all this has just been enormous. So we definitely have crisis, and our work is an attempt to respond to the needs in the system right now.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I know that you are needing to leave by 9:45 for a prior engagement, but we do have one last question from Representative Buchanan.
They're on hold until I get back there. So,
thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Melissa. I've heard your presentation a time or two, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you talked about in my committee on the barriers to licensure that you have been working on.
Thank you for that. Yeah, we have identified a number of difficult moments for people attempting to enter the profession and have work underway. So just the basic fingerprint and background check process, which is critical to make sure we have a workforce taking care of our youngest children that belong in that role and don't have issues in their backgrounds. But there were timing difficulties. It was taking a long time for that process. So we have got a partnership going on to move childcare the licensing fingerprinting process to an electronic process as opposed to the paper-based fingerprint cards. Partnership with DCF. DCF has the live scan equipment. We need to deploy additional machines in the field. So right now we have a letter going out. I think it'll go to Ed Klump to survey law enforcement locations to see if they will partner and if we provide equipment, if childcare providers can come be fingerprinted electronically in certain law enforcement offices. So that's one, and then we think we can leverage pandemic funds to be able to purchase additional equipment. So if we can identify the locations, we can help improve that process. I think there's also some IT issues that go along with that. Different systems at different agencies, KBI's system and the licensing system don't communicate directly with each other, so it's manual entry. You get the results out of KBI. They have to be hand entered into the licensing system. So we'd like to get to a place where we evaluate the data systems and get better communication to also streamline things. So that's one aspect. The fire marshal is supposed to do safety inspections, and there's a backlog right now because of the lack of available inspectors in the fire marshal's office. So I think there are 163 programs waiting for their inspection to be done. So I know the fire marshal has an ask for some additional staff capacity. This is one of those reasons why, and I think an important one to keep in mind. We've got other types of barriers. We've been using pandemic relief funds to provide startup grants to cover the cost of the initial things that need to be done to become licensed for the first time. So those grants are given to make sure that the costs are covered to help entice people to do the things. It's taking certain classes, CPR, and you got to have a fire extinguisher. You have to have certain points of ingress and egress for fire safety, all of those things. There are some licensing requirements that will be part of this infrastructure package. We've developed a career pathway for professionals, so we will honor those with experience and no additional college or higher ed credentials. There's a certificate of mastery that they can achieve, and it's based on experience. We've got a workforce registry so that for the first time, child care licensing will be fully electronic. Like it can be done without pulling files and looking at paper certificates. So it'll be a way to make it more efficient to track and approve of the professional development that's happening. There's a wealth of ways that we have sought to be creative with the one-time money to be able to shore up the system and make it easier. But the bottom line, the biggest barrier are the low wages. I mean, the average in the state, according to our needs assessing, is $9.25 an hour is the pay scale. And it's a job that has no benefits in most cases. And, it's very long hours, very low wages. And so it's hard to entice people into the system. States like North Carolina have wage supplement programs that are state funded. There are a wealth of ways that those things could be funded. And I would hope that with the growing awareness of the role that a robust childcare system and availability play to economic development, that we will give some thought. We've got some good community partnerships happening where local business is partnered, local governments have used some of their pandemic funds to help do some of the startup work happening. But yeah, it's a problem.
All right, real quick, for a second time, Representative Sutton. That'll be the last question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is a pretty easy one. It should be pretty short. You mentioned, Melissa, the need to purchase equipment for law enforcement to fingerprint. In my experience, they have that capacity.
No, I may have misspoken trying to answer quickly. It's not that law enforcement would need to purchase the equipment. We are looking at purchasing more live scan equipment to deploy in certain places while also seeking to partner with law enforcement to use some of their locations. It will involve MOUs so that, because there's billing that has to be done, so we need those legal agreements in place. We need to know if they are willing to engage with us.
All right. Now, if you have that partnership, though, would new equipment to be deployed even be necessary?
That is a local issue, so we would map it out across the state so that it's logical where we deploy equipment we purchase versus partner with law enforcement. That is certainly on our radar, that we don't want to have to just go purchase things without regard.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, and I know you're needing to get to another engagement, so thank you, Director Rucker, for being here today and giving us an update on the Master Tobacco Settlement and also the Children's Initiative Funds.
Thank you for the time.
All right, committee, we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, and that's going to be an update from the Department of Transportation, in particular the Ike plan that was passed a couple of sessions ago. And so I would invite to committee Secretary Julie Lorenz. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. Glad to be here today. Give us just a second. We'll get the presentation up. Okay. Cool. All right. Thank you. It's good to be here today. I've got lots of information to share with you. I'll hit the highlights because you have it in your slides, and then happy to stand for questions. I'll cover the foundation of IKE, the Eisenhower Legacy Transportation Program, provide you with the progress to date, and then talk a little bit about our challenges and opportunities. So let's start with President Eisenhower, for which the program is named. You know, we used to think about transportation as just roads and bridges, and look at his words. No, it's a public good, and we need to leverage every single investment. So we are looking at ways, when we spend money, taxpayers' money, to make sure travel is safer, that we're reducing the cost of transport of people, products, and services, and to make sure we're moving data as effectively and efficiently as possible so that we can make Kansas a better place to live, work, and thrive. Progress has lots of partners. And I would look back to the legislative task force that was pulled together in 2018 that talked to citizens all across the state. And then in 2019, we passed expanded tolling legislation and put a registration fee on electric vehicles. In 2020, you'll remember, with 4 hours to spare, the legislature passed IKE. Thank you, everyone, for your vote and support. After that, the governor signed the bill. We then moved within 8 weeks, $1.6 billion worth of projects into the development pipeline. You see a picture there. You'll recall during COVID, Chairman Waymaster appeared on the video from his garage because at that point we were doing everything remotely. Since that time, we've moved another $750 million into the development pipeline because, you know, we've got this rolling pipeline approach now instead of a one list for 10 years. And we've also moved $750 million into construction. For those of you who are interested, and I know some of you, you know, by face and name, yes, T-Works projects, as required by the IKE legislation, more importantly, upholding the promises made to Kansans, one phase of every single T-Works project has been moved to construction. Please note, we are not done, but we are making strong progress. Thank you all so much. It's an excellent program. We've got good results, but it's because it's a team sport. It's the legislature, it's the governor, it's our private sector partners, it's KDOT stepping up. If you feel like you've got orange barrels all across the state, you're right, because they are. All right. The program, $9.9 billion over 10 years to strengthen infrastructure, help generate more economic growth opportunities, and as I mentioned, there is good, solid bipartisan support. How we are delivering IKE is based on partnerships, making sure we provide as many options as possible, because at the end of the day, we're here to help solve problems for Kansans. So we continued on the blue button side, those programs that were most successful under TWorks, and we introduced new programs under IKE, expanding our portfolio, ways to access dollars through the transportation program to help solve problems for Kansans. It is a testament to the strength of transportation and its importance. More than 2,000 Kansans weighed in during the task force, weighed in as we developed IKE, and as we just completed our last round of local consult in the fall. We had more than 2,500 Kansans participate in that second round of local consult. So you see a consistent support and involvement from across the state in terms of transportation and shaping both policies and priorities. As I mentioned, we are in full swing with our development and construction pipeline, which allows us to be more flexible and address emerging opportunities. It also allows us to meter construction spend based on the dollars that are available. Currently, you all know that we have solid funding in transportation, both from a state and federal perspective. Because of the rolling program, the development pipeline, we have work that will now be available to take advantage of those federal dollars as additional dollars are made available. Let's talk a bit about progress. Construction lettings are up more than 200% in the last 5 years. You can see the chart here going back to 2019, but you can see expansion, modernization dollars have increased. Most importantly, preservation has increased. I'll go pretty quickly through the new program progress under IKE. Preservation Plus, a new program where we both look when we're out doing construction work, preservation work, run a trench, add a little bit of improvement to the extent we can. 40 million of that has been let to date. You know, you love all your kids, but sometimes one of them just brings home A's all the time. That's cost share. It's doing really well. The reason we love it so much is because the state's invested $96 million. It's been matched $68 million by local. So we are able to get those projects that are important to communities over the finish line. That program has been going really well. It's by far our most entrepreneurial program. Local bridge, you guys remember that under the task force, how important the local bridge program is. You'll see additional information on bridges in a minute that we've got some pretty eye-popping numbers there. But we've been able to award 86 bridges at $15 million. Shortline, which was a new program, that's going very well. You can see the numbers there. Driver's ed, despite, you know, some tough educational times, more than 1,000 students have enrolled in the driver's ed program. It's a reimbursement program. And our strategic safety improvements program, we've let 3 projects under that. Broadband dollars, $8 million a year goes to Commerce for administration. You can see how that has been used in Commerce. And on innovative tech, those projects, some are super cool. Looking at embedding sensors at intersections to communicate with future vehicles, you know, that'll be automated. An app for transit so that people don't have to go to 4 different apps. It's combined for a really relatively low cost. This program holds lots of promise going forward. Frankly, we need to do a better job at the department with providing information to potential applicants. So it's off to a good start. It can do better. Economic development, which was a program that was started under TWorks. It continues. We've funded 23 projects at $54 million. Those are things like turn lanes. It's infrastructure related to either retaining or bringing new jobs in. We do not look at projects that would simply shift jobs from one part of the state to the other. Kansas Airport Program, $15 million. Over 100 airports have been served through that program. And on the transit side, $21 million invested in 81 projects. I'm happy to come back and provide more examples if you all are interested. The rail servicing program started under TWorks. We funded 26 improvement projects there. Those are key to freight rail. And on transportation alternatives, $18 million, I would point out, in federal funds. These aren't state funds, going to 40 projects across the state. Think rails to trails, bike crossings, that sort of thing. All right, I'd like to talk a bit about opportunities and challenges. I have a new quote. It's not the Mae West quote. I found a new one for this year. I got too many laughs from the last one, so I went with something a little more standout. But I also think it's perfect for right now. Opportunity is missed by most people because it's dressed in overalls and it looks like work. That's the point, man. We have got lots of opportunity in front of us to make transportation better in Kansas for citizens today and for future generations, because the investments we make today ought to last 20, 50, 70 years. So we need to be intentional in the way we select projects, the way we build quality projects, because these dollars can really make a difference. And it is hard work, and it takes the public and private sector working together. So, you know, it's our favorite electrical engineer there that said that. Our three challenges: workforce, safety, and inflation. No surprise here. We've seen a 6% decline overall in our workforce since 2017. What we know more significantly or more impactfully would be in those areas of like equipment operators, those who run snowplows. Tomorrow and the next day, that's when we really worry about those folks. We also have some concerns on the construction side, which I'll talk about in just a minute. We have a responsibility to try to create a better work environment. We're working on that. So, for example, we've had a very intense focus on safety. Because of that, because we're doing things like tailgate meetings at the work site before work starts. We now have a dashboard that we communicate every Monday. That old saying that what gets measured gets action is what we're doing at KDOT. We have seen workplace incidents decrease 46%. Over $1.5 million has been saved in worker comp costs in the last 2 years. So it's both making the workplace better and it saves taxpayer dollars money. Keep in mind, safety has improved while work has increased by 200%. So it's not like we're doing less work, safety improves. It's the opposite. We've increased salaries for those hardest to fill positions through our agency salary savings, so we haven't asked for an increase in our operating budget. Those have been for equipment operators primarily, with a little bit for engineers. That happened in 2019, and we're increasing recruitment efforts. Okay, now we're getting to the looking forward. Equipment operators continue to concern us, but these construction inspectors, those are a big concern, what we see now. We have 60% fewer than we did in 2011. We anticipate, this is a new tool that we are using at KDOT now to forecast workforce needs. We think we need about 200 additional construction inspectors in '22. I'll talk a bit about how we're going to accomplish that, but I'm just saying it is a concern. The place where we mostly need inspectors will be on the preservation side. Here's some things we're doing, and some of them are super simple. We used to require firms to identify specific inspectors for each project. Well, what we really need is to require certified competent inspectors. It is way too hard for a consultant to say, here's exactly who will be available next June, here's exactly who's available next July. So we have removed that requirement. We're more flexible and easy to work with, and that was that was just one that needed to be done, and that has been helpful. This one is harder to accomplish, but important, and again, because this is a public-private partnership, it's important for us to put work out in a way that's easiest for the private sector to respond to. So we have always talked about our preservation schedule in October to January, and that kind of gives the contractors time then in the spring to think about how they're going to bid. It's so much better if we can give them the fall to get themselves organized, identify their resources, figure out if they need to go find more people so that we can keep work on track. It means we have to accelerate our work and our estimates and projections, but it makes them more capable of responding to the opportunities, thus increases the overall availability of the workforce or their ability to meet our demands. We are bundling some inspection services. This is not bundling projects, but rather say in the Northwest, we'll say, we anticipate 40 projects that will need inspection instead of letting those one at a time, so that companies can figure out, again, it's about them being able to plan their work. So that's another thing that we're headed toward. We need to hire more KDOT inspectors. I don't think we can find 200 in the state to hire, but to the extent we can find some, we absolutely need to. When I talk about qualified inspectors, I'm not talking about a 4-year degree. I'm talking about someone with a high school education that also has proven to be qualified in algebra and geometry and has the ability to look at a set of plans and can say, yes, that's what's being built in the field. It's not a 4-year degree at all, but it's a little more than a high school degree. You have to have some competencies. It takes us about a year to train an inspector. We are also looking at it, and I think I skipped on that slide, would point out today, KDOT inspectors, when adjusted for inflation, make less today than they did in the 1990s. Okay, we're also looking at bringing consultant inspectors into and embedding them in KDOT offices. There's some pros and cons to that. Helps strengthen the overall ability to inspect. It is a source of frustration to KDOT employees to be seated next to a private consultant that's making more money. So, there's a trade-off in everything, and that's one of the challenges. There aren't many silver linings as it relates to COVID, but here's one small one. We kept construction going throughout COVID. One of the ways we did that was, it used to be, you would load up your truck with supplies, it's verified at the scale, the driver gets a ticket, drives to the site, hands the ticket to an inspector who's literally just standing there, and then goes on and delivers the supplies. Now we're just doing that electronically. It eliminates the need for that person to be standing there just collecting tickets. So to the extent we can automate our work, we don't need as many people. That's a good example. And then we're also talking with our federal partners, FHWA, to do risk-based inspection, which means we would do full depth inspection on more complicated, expensive projects, but on some of those overlays, it could be a more risk-based where you would spend less time on the easier projects and more time on the harder projects, and then in a random sort of way, spend on a random sample on the easier projects. I'll tell you, other states do all of the things I've just talked about. These aren't new wild ideas. That's a benefit of not being a leader, is that we can learn some best practices from other states. So nothing about that was surprising. Our next big challenge is on safety. Our fatality rate remains stubbornly high. We've pulled together an executive safety council. Hats off to our chief engineer, Bert Morey. He's championing a clear zone program. We'll talk about federal funds in a minute, and this will come in here. When Representative Francis, when we worked on the long-range plan, said, maybe you need something between preservation plus and modernization. Maybe you need a modernization minus category, which was really his nicer way of saying, don't get so caught up in your programs, KDOT. That's exactly what this program is intended to do. It's to help us get to our D&E routes, those routes that don't carry a lot of traffic, and because of that wouldn't rise up in terms of need in our priority formula, but where we know if we can get out and get a little bit of shoulder, it's going to be enormously helpful. These are the projects that would help fill that gap. We'll need to acquire a little bit of right-of-way. I'm not saying we're going to build the full depth shoulder that we would want to do, but this is a program to help us get to our D&E routes and add a little bit of shoulder. It's a cost-effective way to improving safety that we don't currently have a program or a way to get to those. We also, I would say, have a more aggressive education and outreach campaign as it relates to safety. And then our third challenge is on inflation, and we're keeping an eye on that. Historically, we have built 4.5% into our programs. So if you think about the way our programs are constructed, they're 10 years. 4.5 has served us well under the CTP, the Comprehensive Transportation Program, T-Works, and we applied that now. We know over those last 20 years, you saw years where inflation was really high and really low. That's why 4% has typically worked well. December, we saw 19%. That's a lot, and that's a concern. But it's not a concern if it's for only a couple of months, because remember, this is a 10-year program. It's 120 months. But we are keeping an eye on it. Here are a couple of specific project examples of what we've seen in terms of actual dollars on a let per mile basis. On light preservation, going up 50,000 per mile, and you can see nearly 100,000 per mile for heavy preservation. We're keeping an eye on it. I've got a dashboard that I look at with every letting. Some might say, okay, well then, let's slow your roll on preservation work or on any of your construction work. And trust me, I don't want to use all of our money to just buy inflation. On the other hand, excuse me, it wouldn't be KDOT if I didn't say it's more complicated than that. And there are consequences of not investing. So when you think about pavement and preservation, the reason I pick on that primarily is because that's the biggest percent of our spend. It's $5 billion over 10 years. We take a variety of actions. We can do a thin overlay, and it's 1x. Rehab is 2x. And you can see reconstruction, asphalt and concrete. Asphalt, less expensive, but doesn't last as long. As you expect, life correlates to the dollars. Okay, so this is how we used to think about pavement health. We have 10,000 miles of highway. Every year you lose 1 year of life, so essentially you're using up 10,000 miles of 1 year of life. So you should be replacing at least 1 year of life or replacing 10,000 miles, so to speak. Well, in 21, we did that. If you look at the number of miles we completed and multiply it by the years we would expect of life out of that action, we come up with 10,540 miles. So good news. We replaced the amount of life we should have. However, the bad news is that we kind of started in the ditch because previously we had been not investing that 10,000 miles per year. It was more like, you can see in 2017, about 6,000 miles. So what you see here is, yes, we're starting to bend that curve back up, but we've got a ways to go. So, and Senator Dietrich liked the way I said this last week, so I'll use it again. So on the left, what you've kind of got, we've got a report card, this years of life, and when it says, hey, you got a better grade this year, or you got a worse grade this year. But it doesn't tell you like what the grades are. It doesn't say you went from a D to a C or a D to an F. It just says you got better, you got worse. Because it's really about the actions and the dollars. Now, on the right, this is the other way we look at pavement. These are the federal, this is what we report on the federal side. And I'm not going to poke holes at it because they had to find a measure that all 50 states would report because Congress wants to know if the federal dollars are being used well. What I will say is it only accounts for the surface. It is not an adequate measure of what's really going on. So you'll see there, it looks like our pavement's getting better, because, or at least it's not in as horrible shape. But for those of you on the task force will remember in Olathe, at the Olathe meeting, what we started talking about is what you see is not what you always get. So the highway on the left is a thing of beauty if you're in transportation. It's flat, it's got really nice dark pavement, bright stripes, rides smooth, it's 83 if anybody's interested. You're like, that is one good looking highway. But if you look at the core, it's not. Because what you see is underneath that, the pavement's crumbling. So what you see is not what you always get. So I was really pleased in both House and Senate Transportation last week to roll out for the first time. And for those of you who are interested in performance-based budgeting, it's a big day in Kansas. We finally have, and it's required by the Ike legislation, we have a methodology now, a way to measure what's going on underneath. And that is really important because now we can report out to you really what is the condition of our highway system. It does look at smoothness, but it also looks at rutting and cracking. I'm not an engineer, so I'm going to tell you the story of it. If you have detailed technical questions, happy to come back or get your report on that from one of our pavement management engineers at your own risk, because it can take a while. So, long story short, we have a van now that drives over the pavement and in an automated way collects digitally the pavement surface along with the rutting and cracking. We have spent years correlating what that imagery looks like to then going back and collecting samples, core samples, to make sure there's strong correlation. So we feel really good about this data. We've also looked at actual projects to go back and double check as well. So now we have automated data and we can tell you what's happening with our pavement. This methodology, again, isn't magic, isn't new. Texas, Colorado, Nevada, North Carolina, Utah, lots of states use this approach, and I'm glad we're rolling it out in Kansas. Now, the bad news is, so that's the good news. The bad news is you can see that our pavement in poor condition is actually up at 15%. That doesn't correlate with what the federal measure says because we're measuring essentially two different things. They're only looking at the surface, we're looking at what's underneath. What you can see here is it's a slow slog, but at the investment rate that we had projected under Ike, you start to see that by 2023, we'll start to see a decline in poor condition. Now, this is where, of course, it gets a little more interesting or complicated. This becomes really the mixed bag. So that top dark blue, at that investment level of $365 per year, you see poor start to decline a little, but you see fair start to increase a lot, but you see good start to decline. So when they bring that to me, I'm like, well, sort of like, what do I do with that? You know, like, I don't know that, like, what do we do? Do we want more good, but not as much great? Like, how are we going to work with this? Well, exactly. So that is our next step. I'm pleased to say we have the measure. The next step is to figure out what are our targets. So what amount do we want in each of those conditions? And not all roads are created the same. Interstates should come in at a higher level than maybe those C, D, and E routes. But even at that, it's not all based on traffic because we know freight, ag loads, we need to make sure they're on good pavement too. So there are a lot of factors to take into account. I look forward to coming back and having the conversation with you. But more importantly than any of that is now we can have a real conversation. You all can decide how you think money ought to be invested. So until this time, KDOT, I think, did a really good job. If you said, KDOT, you got $10, go do the best you can, KDOT did. They made the best use of that $10. If you said you have $8, we invested more in surface to make sure the surface was covered up. I mean, like, the good use of that approach. This is a much more sophisticated approach. This is the way you ought to run an organization. Now it's to say, at $10, here's what we can achieve. At $12, here's what we can achieve. At $4. So the legislature now can say, what performance can we achieve or can we buy at these different dollars? And that becomes a much better way to identify performance-based budgeting than just say, do the best you can with these dollars. You now have visibility into what you should expect on your return and should hold the department accountable for achieving that. I would say inflation is a thing to take into account, right? But now it can be a much more informed conversation and you all can make better decisions. So, as I've said, Ike holds us steady. Bipartisan infrastructure law could help us improve. I've been saying around the state, Ike and Bill are our two new best buds. So, Ike, we're taking advantage of being able to replenish the pipeline. Bill, we have some additional federal funds, and there are opportunities to make improvements in Kansas. This is a quick view of Ike investments over 10 years. As I said, $5 billion into preservation, $2.3 billion into modernization and expansion. Those are the buckets we talk about most. Now, I want to be clear about these bill dollars. They are helpful. They are not like this windfall of all windfalls, okay? They are helpful, but it is not a bejesus amount of money. It's not, but it is certainly helpful, and it's certain for 5 years, which is very good for us in terms of managing. These are additional dollars. We'll see about $89 million more per year for highways, $45 million, which is a new bucket for bridges. I'll talk about that in a minute. That's extraordinarily important for the state. $8 million for EV charging infrastructure, $3.7 million for rural transit. I am concerned about those dollars. Not because there isn't need on the rural transit side, there is need. It's just really hard to deliver across big geographies. We're having a hard time finding transit bus drivers. We need to use that money. These are formula funds, so they're not use it or lose it dollars. So some of those dollars, maybe on the transit side, will take us a little longer to get out. So anyway, I wanted you all to be aware of that's what the dollars look like. Kansas has a ton of bridges. You've heard me say before, we have 25,000 bridges. Of that, 20,000 are on the local side. We have the highest per capita number of bridges in the country. We only have 118 people to fund each bridge, and you can see how it goes from there. So we have to be really thoughtful about how we invest our bridge dollars. We also know that we have more need on the local system, significantly more need on the local system than on the state system. Every ag load starts in a field that gets loaded on a truck that usually goes across a county bridge to get to a state highway or rail. If that local bridge is out, that's a problem. Or if it isn't strong enough, wide enough, big enough, that's a problem. So consistent with Ike, we will talk with cities and counties about how to best use those dollars. We started that conversation on December 17th. We will put together a variety of scenarios. That Clear Zone program was one example. Maybe we put more money in modernization and expansion. Those are all the kinds of conversations. I'm as worried about the local system because there's so much, it's such a bigger system and few people to help fund it. Oh, we have hired a grant writer at KDOT because almost half of the bill, some people call it IIJA, anyway, are under discretionary grants. We'll make that grant writer available to cities and counties, not in a one-off way, so we're not going to like write a grant for Beloit and then a grant for Great Bend, but we may say, hey, all of Northwest Kansas, if you want to do a big bridge package, our grant writer will help support that. That will be a way to bring additional dollars into the state. Those dollars have been allocated. We might as well go get dollars to help us improve our system in the way we want to see it, the way we want to see it work in the future. I would also tell you 9,000 of those local bridges were built during President Eisenhower's time or before. Our bridge inventory is old, and I'm not sure, we shouldn't just reflexively go rebuild everything exactly as it is. Some of those bridges need to be bigger, stronger, wider. Maybe some of those bridges could be converted to low water crossings. That's not for KDOT to decide, but we'll work with county commissioners, township folks, help put together an inventory. If they want to convert, currently our local bridge program is we pay about $200,000 to $250,000 for a bridge. If you take a bridge off system, we give you $50,000. Then long term, as a state, we have less to maintain. We want to see if we can look at expanding that kind of program. And then I've already talked about pavement management and the ability to run scenarios and think about what investments we'll buy. So when you put it all together, we have a lot of factors to balance as we look to manage and make best use of the dollars. We really have an opportunity, both under Ike and Bill, to position our system not just to work like it did 20 or 50 years ago, but for it to work today and work well into the future. These dollars need to last a long time. So we want to get it right, and we'll be working with communities. We'll do sort of a local consult light, if you will. We don't need to do a full-blown version of that, but we'll be working with our partners on the private side and all across the state to make sure we're developing and delivering really good projects. Happy to come back sometime if y'all would like to talk about EV charging. Our road usage charge study, 69 Express, was approved. It's going forward. It's the new toll lane in Johnson County. You get to choose. 2 lanes remain free. The new one is tolled. Home, which is a pilot program we've done with Department of Ag to help try to open up carbon markets and improve soil health. And then lastly, this is MJ, our little local consult groupie. She's 5 years old. There's a great quote here where she says, you know, location where people live, it's not just about a paycheck. People want access to recreation, sporting, and shopping. This is a comment that came to us through local consult in the Southwest. People want more than to just survive. They want to prosper and stay rooted. And so when we think about transportation, what we're doing today, yeah, it's for us, but it's also for MJ's generation as well. So we want to make sure our investments are really solid. Thank you, and I'm happy to stand for any questions.
All right, thank you, Secretary Lorenz, for being here. It's always a pleasure to get an update on what's going on in transportation. I have a few questions. You're probably not surprised. First, in regards to the infrastructure bill that was passed by Congress, what is the anticipated amount that the state of Kansas is going to be receiving from that? I know you said some of it was a grant application process, but...
So total, new dollars, $640 million new dollars. So that's over the 5 years. So we have so that's where, you know, you have to be careful because you'll hear a number like 2.5 billion. Well, true, but those funds were already baked into the development of Ike. We held federal funds as steady. So when I talk about bill dollars, these are additional dollars that we'll receive. And that's how we ought to think about it. We shouldn't think about, 2.5 billion, because we already thought we were getting something, you know, like about 2 billion. 640 million is the plus up, is the additional.
And what are the anticipated plans with those additional dollars coming in from the infrastructure bill?
So some of those have restrictions. So electric charging is a good example, 8 million per year on electric charging. It has to go to electrification. So it could be EV charging. It could be to help school, like buy electric school buses. But it has to be related to electrifying transportation. So that is one where we have some latitude. We're going to pull a work group together. You know, we just issued the VW settlement money. Those routes are along I-35 and I-70. So we know we have a lot of work to do to get charging across the state. We'll put a work group together like we have for other Ike things. I talked about the transit money at 3.7 million additional per year. So that's part of that 640 million. So some of those dollars are pretty restricted. The 45 million that I talked about for bridges, super helpful. I believe 25% of that has to go to poor bridges. 50% can go to good bridges or fair condition bridges. So there are restrictions, and all the guidance isn't out yet. So we're looking at the guidance, seeing where we have the most flexible dollars, working with locals to figure out what to do with those.
All right. So kind of going off on that, and this is going to be contrary to some of the comments that were made last week on the floor that a rural legislator doesn't know exactly what's going on in an urban sector of the state, which I'm going to be, I'm going to discredit that right now because I lived in Johnson County for a while. Yeah, I'm a rural legislator now, and I live in a rural area of the state, but I lived in Johnson County, and I understand what the needs are of the Kansas City metropolitan area. My wife lived in Wichita for 20 years, so we both know exactly what is needed in our urban areas. So in regards to commuter rail or transit, and I'm gonna throw this out there in regards to either the Ike plan or for the money that's coming in from the infrastructure bill, which when I was on the Transportation Task Force, you heard me talk about this many times. If we want the urban areas of our state to grow, the Kansas City metropolitan area and Wichita, to grow even more than they have in the last few years, we need to look at commuter rail service. Because when I took History of the Urban City at the University of Kansas, I'm going to date myself, in 2000, it talked about if the core city wants to grow, you're going to have to address the needs of commuting. And so I think we could possibly partner with Wyandotte, Johnson, and Sedgwick counties in regards to setting up an infrastructure for commuter rail service, especially in the Kansas City area, since they're expanding the streetcar project, and we could actually see anticipated growth in those counties if we had an established commuter rail service. Because if all cities are going towards that metric of looking at a way to increase commuter traffic by having either light rail or heavy rail or something in between, and so we need to position ourselves for that. Like in the Transportation Task Force, I talked about linking Wyandotte and Johnson County, going to Union Station as the hub for the Kansas City metropolitan area, in Wichita, having commuter rail service along US 400 or Kellogg between Eisenhower Airport and downtown Wichita to expect that type of growth. And so I'm just kind of wondering, is there any discussion with the locals in trying to possibly move that forward?
So through the KC streetcar, they are taking a look at west of Maine going over to KU Med. So that would be a significant growth opportunity for that, for Wyandotte County. So I would look to local systems to think about how they want to grow, and then we are part of that discussion. Overland Park is doing a study now to reimagine college, because what they're seeing is that about 5:30 or 6 o'clock, tons of, as you know, lots of jobs located along College Boulevard, but about 6 o'clock, boom, everybody's gone. They've gone back to their suburbs. So Johnson, I should say, Overland Park's very intentional about looking at how can they get some mixed use along that corridor. And part of that then becomes a question of, do you do bus, although your trolley or streetcar, modern streetcar, is a more desirable amenity because it's fixed route, and then people have that certainty that it's not going to move. But on the bus side of things, you do want some flexibility, and micro-transit, smaller buses that can have more routes often are more efficient. So those kinds of conversations are going on. The state is a participant, but we look at that as a locally led effort.
All right. And the last question I have is still in regards to rail. But can you give us, if there is an update on the Heartland Flyer between Kansas City and Dallas?
Sure. Good question. Just had, Senator McGinn had the Rail Caucus meeting last week. Amtrak is set to receive a tremendous amount of money. What we don't know yet is how that will be deployed. We will be actively seeking a grant, but I will continue to say we need Oklahoma to be our partner in that. We think roughly $30 million in capital costs are needed on the Kansas side. Oklahoma would need to invest about $90 million. We can't just build a track to nowhere, so we need to make sure they come to the table too. It would be great if both states can receive a capital grant. That would be huge. Remember, there is an operating cost that's associated with maintaining that service. We are doing a passenger rail study right now to identify those costs. Call it $2 million annually. I mean, it could be a little more, it could be a little less, but like roughly that's what we would expect on an annual basis.
All right, thank you. Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a couple questions back on the inspectors. You had mentioned that there were high school degrees that need high school degrees, and then a year-long training. Mm-hmm. Are you able to maybe leverage with any of the community colleges or tech colleges to maybe shorten that training?
I can't answer that specifically. I know there are KDOT specific things we want them to be familiar with. I can get an answer, Brendan, if you'll take that down.
It might be something that they would be able to do quicker.
Yeah, I don't know, because I know there are some paces we want to put through that are specific to KDOT. I can tell you we're doing everything we can. We advertise on Craigslist, mm-hmm. LinkedIn, Facebook, every place we can think of.
Okay, and then on page 44, I guess I've seen this in my district where it seems like that every 2 years or so come in and put a new thin layer on the road, and it just doesn't last much more than it seems like within 6 months they have to come in and seal the cracks already. So with that, it seems like to me, it's a waste that every 2 years or so, we're putting another however million. I think the last I saw was like 16 million or something like that they spent on one of the highways in my district. And are you looking at possibly going in and in even some of those less traveled, I guess, roads that are really high, they're less traveled but very heavy traffic on them, as far as a lot of trucks, a lot of commercial trucks, but also a lot of agriculture trucks. Are you looking at possibly going in and just tearing them out and putting that new layer under them, or instead of just keeping?
Oh, yeah. So you can see in 2017, we only did 122 miles of heavy action. Last year, we did 598 miles of heavy action. Okay. There are times where a light action will get you by, but those heavier actions are where you get your years of service, and the heavier the load, and that can be defined as either a lot of traffic or less traffic but really heavy trucks, and that helps dictate whether we're going to use a concrete treatment or we're going to use an asphalt treatment. We have a ton of work to do around the state, and a lot of that is going to be on heavier actions. Okay. No doubt about it. I 1,000% appreciate the question.
Well, it just seems like
yes,
it's just
you chase your tail.
We're not making any progress on them, and I'm sure it's that underlayment that is just crumbling underneath there. So
that's why I'm so excited that we can now capture what's going on underneath and properly plan for what needs to be done, and share with you how much that would cost.
Yeah, I imagine that, K1 goes right by my house or pretty close to my house, and you talk about the bridges that, I imagine that underlayment is probably 1950s, because I remember my dad talking about when they paved it would have been probably around in the 50s. It probably hasn't been anything done to that base since Eisenhower was president. At least it's not since Lincoln was president, but like like the prisons. But yeah, so I appreciate looking into that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hate to take the time of the committee up because I often have an opportunity to talk with Secretary Lorenz, but usually I don't have this big a crowd. So one of the things, could you kind of put in perspective what $89 million a year is? It seems like a huge amount, but can you just talk about what the estimated cost of maybe the project in North Wichita is, and what maybe the estimated cost when we do the improvements on, what is it, US 69 and Johnson County?
I appreciate that question. So for example, North Junction, we have been taking in bites, if you will. So the next segment of North Junction is $50 million. Okay, that's not the whole thing at all. That's just the next segment. US 69, $300 million. And Overland Park is bringing $30 million to the table. North Junction brought, I don't remember, but they brought a significant portion to Wichita brought a significant portion to North Junction. No, 89, that's why I want to go out and talk with communities, because $89 million can go like that. Because these are expensive, but they're also not anticipated. So I want to make sure we're doing something special with them to make sure, whether it's clear zones, the bridge money is really helpful, that we're really getting good value out of these extra dollars, that we don't just say, put a little more in preservation. That might be the right answer, but I want to make sure we're thinking about it. And believe me, I'm driving everybody crazy over at Eisenhower with the thinking about it, because I want lots of options for what may not feel like a lot of money to them, but I think it's important.
And I do, what little I know about the budget, I do think the money for the bridges is going to be huge. I mean, that's a real increase for people that have bridge projects in their district. So I want to encourage everybody to work with their county commissioners to move forward with that. And I liked one comment you talked about where maybe the answer is a low water crossing. In parts of the state, it doesn't rain much or very often. And I hope maybe somehow KDOT can find ways to partner with some of those in those counties on that. Last thing, kind of to editorialize, you know, I think many of our pay issues across the state, there's two aspects to it. There's what we call wage compression, where we've addressed an immediate ill and we've increased salaries, and where sometimes other positions haven't been compensated, and we've created a compression issue. Just to give you and the committee some background, in 2019 workforce report from the state, the equipment operators at KDOT had a 28% turnover, and that was by no means the highest in the state. Another one of the budgets I had, corrections officers 1A in 2019 had 81% turnover. I think KDOT's non-classified as a whole in 2019, for the last 2 or 3 years, you had about 20% turnover. And I just want to say, there's a cost of doing business when you have that much turnover, continual training. Anyway, if you'd like to comment on those numbers, any?
No, it's a source of concern. We have managed in that our crews kind of chase the storm, if you will, and we share across the districts. But that only lasts so long. I'm concerned about so much, a great percentage of our workforce could retire. That's no surprise. We always knew the baby boomers were like the rat moving through the snake. But they're gonna move out, and we are having a really hard time recruiting people. And I'm all for working with the private sector, and we can outsource some of our jobs, but we really want to be careful on the equipment operators and the maintenance side, because you need people to show up on Christmas Eve and be willing to work for 3 or 4 days. So that is really hard.
Last comment, this isn't a question, but the engineering techs also help with snow removal and disasters and things like that. So as we start to address that problem, we can also help with snow removal.
And they aren't just snow plow operators. Then in the summer they mow and they fix signs. I mean, they aren't just a one-season workforce.
Okay. Representative Francis says he's done. Representative Helgerson.
You brought up something else that in other states, I've noticed that the retention is not just Kansas, it's other places. And that the only way they have found to retain individuals is to have a strong retirement system. And a number of people have brought up that our retirement system has not kept pace to what it was historically. And that if we had a stronger retirement system, those individuals who we cannot keep if we try to out-finance the private sector, the reason they stayed was because we had a strong retirement system. As that retirement system has not been improved, those people don't come to Kansas workforce to get the security of our CAPER system. Do you want to comment, or you just want to leave it at that?
Well, what I would say is that we would be appreciative of any tools that would help us keep people or recruit people. It could be CAPERs, it could be healthcare, it could be pay, it could be bonuses, any of that. I would also say workforce shortage is not specific to Kansas. It's all across the country. It's a tough time to find people and get them to stay. And baby boomers have decided they're not going to work. They want to go home. So it's tough. And the reason I say all of that is because we have to compete in each of these communities, and the workforce is small. And Representative Francis, I want to commend him for the hearings he's held in budget subcommittee, and he's asked employees to speak. But you can see there are differences in the state. In Northeast Kansas, it can take us more than 200 days to fill a position. In Southwest Kansas, what was it? It was like, let's call it 90 days. Southeast Kansas, 45 days. So there isn't one solution, and there isn't, it's also a local workforce issue, and it varies across the state. It's, what I left the message is that this is complicated, and there's not one answer, it's a whole series.
Do you have another question, or no? Representative Prael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Secretary Lorenz. The dollars that you said would be coming from Bill that we would put into highways, that was what,
89.
$89 million. Would you put in perspective for the rest of the committee how much it costs to build a 4-lane highway per mile?
Okay, so a 2-lane is about 10 million. So I'm going to say 20 million, but I'm not the technical expert.
Okay, so that puts in perspective, you know, how many miles we can do with 80-some million.
Right. Also, that's why we talk a lot about passing lanes.
Right.
As well.
Right. At another date, I would like for you to be able to talk to us about the new hot lane situation.
Oh, absolutely.
But where time is of an essence now. So thank you, Madam Secretary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And time is of the, we're way over, and so I won't pontificate. That's for another day. And I want to ask you about what I always ask you about, because it is moving. But I do want to talk just briefly about the rail improvements, short line railroads.
Yes.
We had something in there that was of great benefit to many of my folks. And as far as moving forward with funding more of those loadouts, you know, in some of our country grain elevators that we've got, I believe, funding after this year we're out. Is that something that you would work with us in putting that money back in?
Oh, absolutely happy to talk about that, for sure.
Okay.
It has been helpful not just to rail, but to shippers.
Yep.
We have done, I think it has been a fantastic program. I think it's a good investment for the state.
And also quickly, we're seeing, I know in Southeast Kansas, there was an announcement a few months ago of a soy crush plant going on. And that's going on all over the country now. We've kind of turned back. Rail seems to be the best place to transport. So is that a discussion you've had with some of your ag partners and looking at rail and improving some of those in those soy growing areas as we look at soy meal and some of those products?
So I'm glad to tell you we are initiating a freight study, which will look at both trucks and rail and transload facilities. Aviation, though it's not quite as important in freight, but on high-value freight it is. So, and we are forming an advisory group, critical to do that planning.
Very good. Thank you for your efforts, Secretary. And we miss Lindsay, but you have done, you all are doing a great job. So thanks.
My wingman's gone.
Last question, Representative Wolfmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your presentation. I just was curious about the traffic fatalities remaining steady. I'm sure there's some explanation, but I would have assumed with COVID and so many people off the roads and staying home and not going to work that there would have been more of a decrease.
You know, we have an opening for traffic planner at KDOT if you'd like to apply, because you're exactly right. No, forever, forever, fatalities have sort of generally tracked with amount of traffic until COVID. And what we saw, unfortunately, during COVID, crazy high speeds. People looked at these open highways and they're like, well, cool, I'll just drive way faster. So we actually saw an uptick. I also think, this is just a personal opinion, more distracted driving. People are thinking about a lot of other things, but certainly we saw higher speeds. No decrease in fatalities. We do have an opening.
All right. As mentioned by some of the other representatives, we are kind of over time, but I want to thank Secretary Lorenz for being here. And we definitely will have a follow-up in regards to some other aspects of KDOT. Namely, I think, as Representative Prael had mentioned, in regards to the tolling and have an update in regards to that. But thank you for being here today and for the great presentation. Committee, I would like to preface before we adjourn today that tomorrow we're planning on a hearing on House Bill 2548 and then have an update from KDADS. However, please be aware that tomorrow may bring different changes to the schedule. regarding the weather. If there are any changes to tomorrow's meeting, I will definitely let all of you know. And so we'll just kind of see how the weather plays out and what decision is made by leadership in regards to how things will progress tomorrow. So right now, until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., we are adjourned.